Immanuel Kant, Critique of Pure Reason, 1781, translated by Norman Kemp Smith. Preface to the second edition, 1787. Whether the treatment of such knowledge as lies within the province of reason does or does not follow the secure path of a science is easily to be determined from the outcome. For if after elaborate preparations, frequently renewed, it is brought to a stop immediately it nears its goal, if often it is compelled to retrace its steps and strike into some new line of approach, or again, if the various participants are unable to agree in any common plan of procedure, then we may rest assured that it is very far from having entered upon the secure path of a science, and is indeed a merely random grouping. In these circumstances we shall be rendering a service to reason, should we succeed in discovering the path upon which it can securely travel, even if, as a result of so doing, much that is comprised in our original aims, adopted without reflection, may have to be abandoned as fruitless. That logic has already, from the earliest times, proceeded upon this sure path is evidenced by the fact that since Aristotle it has not required to retrace a single step, unless, indeed, we care to count as improvements the removal of certain needless subtleties, or the clearer exposition of its recognized teaching, features which concern the elegance rather than the certainty of the science. It is remarkable also that to the present day this logic has not been able to advance a single step, and is thus to all appearance a closed and completed body of doctrine. If some of the moderns have thought to enlarge it by introducing psychological chapters on the different faculties of knowledge, imagination, wit, etc., metaphysical chapters on the origin of knowledge, or on the different kinds of certainty according to difference in the objects, idealism, skepticism, etc., or anthropological chapters on prejudices, their causes and remedies, this could only arise from their ignorance of the peculiar nature of logical science. We do not enlarge but disfigure sciences if we allow them to trespass upon one another's territory. The sphere of logic is quite precisely delimited. Its sole concern is to give an exhaustive exposition and a strict proof of the formal rules of all thought, whether it be a priori or empirical, whatever be its origins or its objects, and whatever hindrances, accidental or natural, it may encounter in our minds. That logic should have been thus successful is an advantage which it owes entirely to its limitations, whereby it is justified in abstracting, indeed it is under obligation to do so, from all objects of knowledge and their differences, leaving the understanding nothing to deal with save itself and its form. But for reason to enter on the sure path of science is, of course, much more difficult, since it has to deal not with itself alone, but also with objects. Logic, therefore, as a propedeutic, forms, as it were, only the vestibule of the sciences, and when we are concerned with specific modes of knowledge, while logic is indeed presupposed in any critical estimate of them, yet for the actual acquiring of them we have to look to the sciences properly and objectively so called. Now, if reason is to be a factor in these sciences, something in them must be known a priori, and this knowledge may be related to its object in one or other of two ways, either as merely determining it and its concept, which must be supplied from elsewhere, or as also making it actual. The former is theoretical, the latter practical knowledge of reason. In both, that part in which reason determines its object completely a priori, namely the pure part, however much or little this part may contain, must be first and separately dealt with, in case it be confounded with what comes from other sources. For it is bad management if we blindly pay out what comes in, and are not able, when the income falls into arrears, to distinguish which part of it can justify expenditure, and in which line we must make reductions. Mathematics and physics, the two sciences in which reason yields theoretical knowledge, have to determine their objects a priori, the former doing so quite purely, the latter having to reckon, at least partially, with sources of knowledge other than reason. In the earliest times to which the history of human reason extends, mathematics, among that wonderful people, the Greeks, had already entered upon the sure path of science. But it must not be supposed that it was as easy for mathematics as it was for logic, in which reason has to deal with itself alone, to light upon, or rather to construct for itself, that royal road. On the contrary, I believe that it long remained, especially among the Egyptians, in the grouping stage, and that the transformation must have been due to a revolution brought about by the happy thought of a single man, the experiment which he devised, marking out the path upon which the science must enter, and by following which secure progress throughout all time and in endless expansion is infallibly secured. The history of this intellectual revolution, far more important than the discovery of the passage round the celebrated Cape of Good Hope, and of its fortunate author, has not been preserved. But the fact that Diogenes Laertius, in handing down an account of these matters, names the reputed author of even the least important among the geometrical demonstrations, even of those which for ordinary consciousness stand in need of no such proof, does at least show that the memory of the revolution, brought about by the first glimpse of this new path, must have seemed to mathematicians of such outstanding importance as to cause it to survive the tide of oblivion. A new light flashed upon the mind of the first man, be he Thales or some other, who demonstrated the properties of the isosceles triangle. The true method, so he found, was not to inspect what he discerned either in the figure or in the bare concept of it, and from this, as it were, to read off its properties, but to bring out what was necessarily implied in the concepts that he had himself formed a priori, and had put into the figure in the construction by which he presented it to himself. If he is to know anything with a priori certainty, he must not ascribe to the figure anything save what necessarily follows from what he has himself set into it in accordance with his concept. Natural science was very much longer in entering upon the highway of science. It is, indeed, only about a century and a half since Bacon, by his ingenious proposals, partially initiated this discovery, partly inspired fresh vigour in those who were already on the way to it. In this case also the discovery can be explained as being the sudden outcome of an intellectual revolution. In my pleasant remarks I am referring to natural science only in so far as it is founded on empirical principles. When Galileo caused balls, the weights of which he had himself previously determined, to roll down an inclined plane; when Torricelli made the air carry a weight which he had calculated beforehand to be equal to that of a definite volume of water; or in more recent times when Stahl changed metals into oxides and oxides back into metals, by withdrawing something and then restoring it, a light broke upon all students of nature. They learned that reason has insight only into that which it produces after a plan of its own, and that it must not allow itself to be kept as it were in nature's leading strings, but must itself show the way with principles of judgment based upon fixed laws, constraining nature to give answer to questions of reason's own determining. Accidental observations made in obedience to no previously thought-out plan can never be made to yield a necessary law, which alone reason is concerned to discover, reason holding in one hand its principles, according to which alone concordant appearances can be admitted as equivalent to laws, and in the other hand the experiment which it has devised in conformity with these principles must approach nature in order to be taught by it. It must not, however, do so in the character of a pupil who listens to everything the teacher chooses to say, but of an appointed judge who compels the witnesses to answer questions which he has himself formulated. Even physics, therefore, owes the beneficent revolution in its point of view entirely to the happy thought that while reason must seek in nature, not fictitiously ascribe to it, whatever as not being knowable through reason's own resources has to be learnt, if learnt at all, only from nature, it must adopt as its guide in so seeking that which it has itself put into nature. It is thus that the study of nature has entered on the secure path of science, after having for so many centuries been nothing but a process of mere random grouping. Metaphysics is a completely isolated speculative science of reason, which soars far above the teachings of experience, and in which reason is indeed meant to be its own pupil. Metaphysics rests on concepts alone, not like mathematics on their application to intuition. But though it is older than all other sciences, and would survive even if all the rest were swallowed up in the abyss of an all-destroying barbarism, it has not yet had the good fortune to enter upon the secure path of a science. For in it, reason is perpetually being brought to a stand, even when the laws into which it is seeking to have, as it professes, an a priori insight, are those that are confirmed by our most common experiences. Ever and again we have to retrace our steps, as not leading us in the direction in which we desire to go. So far too are the students of metaphysics from exhibiting any kind of unanimity in their contentions, that metaphysics has rather to be regarded as a battleground quite peculiarly suited for those who desire to exercise themselves in mock combats, and in which no participant has ever yet succeeded in gaining even so much as an inch of territory, not at least in such manner as to secure him in its permanent possession. This shows beyond all questioning that the procedure of metaphysics has hitherto been a merely random grouping, and what is worst of all, a grouping among mere concepts. What, then, is the reason why, in this field, the sure road to science has not hitherto been found? Is it perhaps impossible of discovery? Why, in that case, should nature have visited our reason with the restless endeavour whereby it is ever searching for such a path, as if this were one of its most important concerns? Nay, more, how little cause have we to place trust in our reason if, in one of the most important domains of which we would have fain have knowledge, it does not merely fail us, but lures us on by deceitful promises, and in the end betrays us? Or if it be only that we have thus far failed to find the true path, are there any indications to justify the hope that by renewed efforts we may have better fortune than has fallen to our predecessors? The examples of mathematics and natural science, which by a single and sudden revolution have become what they now are, seem to me sufficiently remarkable to suggest our considering what may have been the essential features in the changed point of view by which they have so greatly benefited. Their success should incline us, at least by way of experiment, to imitate their procedure, so far as the analogy which, as species of rational knowledge, they bear to metaphysics may permit. Hitherto it has been assumed that all our knowledge must conform to objects, but all attempts to extend our knowledge of objects by establishing something in regard to them a priori by means of concepts have, on this assumption, ended in failure. We must therefore make trial whether we may not have more success in the tasks of metaphysics if we suppose that objects must conform to our knowledge. This would agree better with what is desired, namely, that it should be possible to have knowledge of objects a priori, determining something in regard to them prior to their being given.